Now we got the confirmation. The recording is in progress. Thank you so much for joining. We are not going to waste any time. We have so much to get to today. I am going to go ahead and dive in. Please bear with me just a moment. All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for your patience there as well. Welcome to the second installment of The Exchange, Data Centers 101. We will tackle the topic of health today. I'm Dr. Natasha D. Jarnett. I am at the Christina Lee Brown Environment Institute at University of Louisville, and I lead community engagement in the Institute. And I serve on the research teams of Greenheart Louisville and the Superfund Research Center. And it's with a grateful heart that I acknowledge my co-conspirators in this work, Doctors Candy Walker and Joy Hart, who lead the Community Engagement Core at Greenheart Louisville, and Doctors Ted Smith and Lauren Heverly, who lead the Community Engagement Core of the Superfund Research Center. And this series is hosted by the Christina Lee Brown Environment Institute, and it's for a program that's called The Exchange, a new program called The Exchange that brings together the community engagement initiatives of both Greenheart Louisville and the University of Louisville Superfund Research Center. And we also want to thank for Social Responsibility for being a sponsor in this series. As we get started, I will note that the opinions expressed by the presenters are that of their own and do not necessarily represent the views of University of Louisville or the Christina Lee Brown Christina Lee Brown Environment Institute, and nor do the use of logos therein indicate endorsement. So we have a few goals within this series. We expect it to be a knowledge exchange. There will be experts that come each week to share their expertise, their experiences, their lived experience, and their research on data centers. So please keep in mind, this is an emerging topic of discussion. Data centers are operating in communities across the US, and there are many data centers being built at this minute. And as such, research on this is still developing and still evolving. So we hope that what is shared will inspire you to further research on this topic. We want you to engage in the dialogue, and you all did fantastic on that in the first webinar. Not only did you pose questions, but you also answered questions in the chat, and that is the type of spirit that we would love to see continue in this. That is why we hosted this as a Zoom meeting rather than a Zoom webinar, so that there can be more interaction between the folks that are here watching and participating in this series. So please engage in the chat. We also have an extra way for you to engage. So just go ahead and open your mind to using Menti in just a few minutes so that we can better understand who is in the room and interact more. This is a great opportunity to share resources, which you all did fantastic with in the first webinar. Please feel free to share your resources in the chat. We are developing a resource library that we will share at the end of this series. If you have already shared the resource, but it is specific to what's being discussed today, we welcome you to go ahead and add it in, because there are people that are here for this installment that weren't here for the last. So please continue to share your resources. Sharing is caring. So please drop that link. And lastly, and maybe most importantly, this is an increasingly politically charged topic of discussion. There are viewpoints within viewpoints within viewpoints, and then there are just as many viewpoints on the opposite side of that. We want this to be a space where people can be brave and safe in sharing their expertise. So I encourage us to all be welcoming of that, whether that's in the chat or whether that is in viewing the speakers that come to share their time and their expertise. When we have questions and comments in response to what is being shared, please try to keep your commentary focused on the topic and not necessarily directed at a person. So with that, we want to hear from you. We want to know who is in the room. So we have a couple questions that will help us to understand who you are, uh, without violating any type of confidentiality. Don't worry about that. But we'd love to know a little bit about who's in the room and why some folks are in the room. So I'm going to stop sharing, and Eviana is going to share this Menti poll so you can join in. So you can scan the QR code that's on the screen. You're also able to just type in the browser menti.com and enter the code 15722899. Again, that's 15722899, or you can simply scan the QR code on your screen. All right, this is so exciting to see. I love this. I'm seeing lots of places come up. Certainly lots of Louisville. We are from the University of Louisville, the host, and so it's wonderful to see our host institution and city very much present here. Other parts of Kentucky we see represented, Frankfurt as well, but we have people as far as Sacramento, California, Spartanburg, South Carolina, Washington, D.C. is well represented. St. Matthews, which is in Louisville, the U of L Health Sciences campus, also in Louisville, Kentucky. We have Florida represented. Let's see, my mother's house. I love it. I love it. That's the best place to be, isn't it? Ah, fantastic. It looks like almost everyone has responded. The Bay Area, I'll write it as it was said. Fantastic. This is wonderful. So glad that you are joining from everywhere you are joining from. Ah, Well Care of Kentucky. Yes, wonderful. Hartford, Connecticut. Thank you for adding to the chat and to the Menti poll. Let's go on to our next question. What brings you into this webinar? Several folks have said that there's a hyperscale data center that is proposed in their area. Some have said that there's already a hyperscale data center in their area, and most are here because they want to learn more about data centers. So far, no one is here to troll. Okay, trolls are also welcome. However, wonderful to hear that many people are here because they're curious about them. But there are several that either have them in their communities or are proposed in their communities. Looks like just over half have participated there. Oh, Eviana, can you go back one, please? And then forward one. Perfect, thank you. So we have a sliding scale question here. To what extent are you concerned about the health effects of data centers? And that is the topic of discussion for today. And so you have the opportunity to rank this between 1 for not at all concerned, all the way up to 5 for extremely concerned. Given the topic of conversation, you're in the right place to learn more about these health impacts of data centers. That is an overwhelming majority that have responded, indicating that they fall close to the extremely concerned range when it comes to the health effects of data centers in our communities. So thank you so much. Thank you for participating. We'll continue to collate the results of that. I have just, I'm going to actually pass it to Lauren Heverly. We have a video that we'd like to share to orient folks to the topic as we dive in. So bear with us just a moment as we get that set up.
Home to more than 50,000 people, South Haven, Mississippi is a quiet suburb. That is, residents say, until Elon Musk's AI power plant came to town. For months now, this is the sound communities near the plant hear. All day and night.
Sounds like jets are taking off and they never take off.
Coming from dozens of methane turbines sent to power Elon Musk's AI data center. That's the power plant, and we're getting a decibel reading here in the low 60s. That's about as loud as a dishwasher running 24/7 just steps from that house.
When I was a little girl, the garden was right over there.
Crystal Polk's family has lived here for generations, before Black people were even allowed to own property. What has life been like for you since the turbines came to town?
Excruciating. The noise is constant. It never ends. Sometimes it's very, very, very loud with loud screeching and railing, like rails are hitting up against each other. That's just unbearable.
And it's not just a concern over noise, but air pollution too. Nonprofit newsroom Floodlight published this thermal drone footage, which they say shows the gas burning at the facility. The Environmental Protection Agency has said gas turbines are a major source of hazardous air pollutants, including formaldehyde and other probable human carcinogens.
I have severe asthma, and sometimes I can smell the pollution in the air, and I don't want to be exposed to that and cause more damage to myself.
The Mississippi Department of Environmental Quality telling NBC News right now they've confirmed the facility is utilizing efficient air pollution control technology to minimize emission, despite operating without an air permit for months, which the department said wasn't required for the initial temporary turbines.
We don't really know how bad this pollutant is right now.
Jason Haley has doubts.
Do you worry it could be bad?
Yes, I do. You shouldn't put this right next to people's neighborhoods.
He co-founded the Safe and Sound Coalition, a group trying to stop those turbines from becoming permanent. He says people like this officer come by every few hours to take decibel readings, but that the readings don't tell the whole story. We took a decibel reading down at the park, and it was like in the 50s, 60s, which is equivalent to the hum of a dishwasher, which might not sound like much to people.
I've heard the comparison to this isn't much louder than my dishwasher or my vacuum cleaner is louder than that. Well, you don't run that 24/7.
Say did not respond to NBC News' request for comment about the Mississippi plant and residents' concerns. South Haven's mayor called the noise a legitimate concern and says XAI installed a $7 million sound wall and is considering more mitigation. He also emphasized the economic impact.
Our city and entire community will soon reap unprecedented financial benefits from this new strategic alliance.
Say plans to spend more than $20 billion in the area, the governor announced, bringing with it much needed jobs. But Jason and Crystal are not alone in their worry. Hundreds of people showed up to the state hearing in South Haven, urging officials to reject XAI's bid for 41 permanent gas turbines. This month, Mississippi regulators unanimously approved those permanent turbines, which the Mississippi Department of Environmental Quality says will require an air permit. On X, Elon Musk said he was thrilled it was approved, adding it powers the future of AI innovation, a future the residents we spoke to say will cost them their own.
I can't live with this. I'm going to have to move.
Tell me more about what's happening for you right now.
It's just the thought that this may be the end of something that's been in my family for years. I feel like we don't matter to those who are in charge, that we are invisible to them.
Priscilla Thompson, NBC News, South Haven, Mississippi.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on break.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Lauren. Certainly we can see from that video why health in data centers is a worthy topic. Without too much further ado, I am proud to introduce today's speaker. LaTricea Adams is the founder and CEO and president of Young, Gifted, and Green, a national environmental justice and civil rights organization. She's a former K through 12 public educator and district administrator of 16 years. She was the youngest African-American woman and only K-12 educator appointed to the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. Through Young, Gifted, and Green, LaTricea founded the Mid-South Environmental Justice Center, advancing healthy housing, pollution reduction, lead poisoning prevention, and green jobs across the Mid-South. She also founded the Black Maternal and Environmental Health Day, now recognized in over 20 states. So I first met LaTricea when I was working at the American Public Health Association, and she probably doesn't even remember this, but we were so excited to award her for her incredible work with Black Millennials for Flint, for which she founded. And I then had the opportunity to work much more closely with her while she served on the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. And she would often ask the question, But what about maternal health? What about child health? And so when we consider exposures in communities, may we all channel LaTricea and ask ourselves, what about those who bear the highest burden? So we are really excited for her to share today about the topic of data centers and health. I believe that central to every new industry, every new entity that is being introduced in our community, we should be asking, how will this affect health and quality of life? And perhaps more importantly, how will this affect the health of those most susceptible and even that of future generations? I am proud to pass the baton over to LaTricea Adams to lead us in discussion today. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thank you so much. That was such a great story. I did not know that. That just completely made my day. But as I am preparing to share my screen, I'm so grateful for the opportunity to talk about something that I have been working on. And y'all excuse all of these different uh, windows open. It represents all of my thoughts and tasks. But I'm really excited to talk about what I'm saying is the hidden cost of the data center boom. We know that the expansion of data centers just seemed to just go at warp speed, almost seemingly overnight. And I'm so glad that you all started with that video. The video that you saw is in South Haven, Mississippi. South Haven, Mississippi is right across state line from Memphis. So essentially, just to give a little bit of context, I'm Memphian born and raised. I am from a community called Whitehaven. Whitehaven and South Haven border. Where Whitehaven is on the Memphis side, South Haven is across state line. It's so close, in fact, that growing up, it was quicker to go to South Haven to do grocery shopping than it was to go further into the city. To give some more context, the organization that was mentioned, the Safe and Sound Coalition, Young Gifted and Green works very closely with this group. They are very much so a group of concerned citizens of South Haven. Just to be candid, I'm so proud of them to understand the cultural undertones between South Haven and Mississippi and Memphis. You can, kind of interpret what that may be like. But it has been a pleasure, even though in chaos, to work with them as we navigate this. But just wanted to give a little bit of context there. All right, so let's dig right in to give a little bit more info about who we are. As Dr. Natasha mentioned, we used to be called Black Millennials for Flint. We got started about a decade ago now in the wake of the Flint water crisis. And so over time, our work expanded. Once upon a time, millennials were the young ones. We have now graduated to auntie. I claim that proudly. And so there has always been a focus on intergenerational organizing, but also leadership capacity. And so now we still work from an intergenerational perspective, of course, taking so much wisdom from our elders in the movement, but then also youth. So both Gen Z and now Gen Alpha, because Gen Alpha is about 15 years old, the oldest Gen Alpha. People are growing up. We also are national as it relates to environmental policy, and then we have local programming as well. So I wanted to just know who is this girl and what is Young Gifted and Green? Wanted to give a little bit more context. So let's get right into it. So, with data centers, and far often or not enough, there's not a lot of mentioning of what the public health implications are. We've heard a lot about the energy consumption, the issues surrounding water, but there's also critical issues specifically to air, particularly with air pollution. When we think about what powers data centers, they are often connected to the grid and they're using an intense amount of energy. So, one, that creates a ton more emissions. And then also, in addition to it putting wear and tear on the actual grid, it also introduces even more potent types of emissions. I'm going to give a bit more of an example when I talk about the case study actually between Memphis, Tennessee, and South Haven, um, particularly in this community where, you have your same thing with like NOx, ozone, PM2, particulate matter, so on and so on, but now introduces this intense level of formaldehyde, for example, which I think that you heard in this video that we just saw. Um, but in addition to that, with it being a public health issue, it also is an economic issue as well. So, looking here, just the information with this group of folks, I know you already know, there's a projected about 1,300 deaths each year, um, until like 2030 as it relates to air pollution, but specifically as it relates to data center air pollution. Remember, this is something that we haven't seen before. We're talking about, for example, in Memphis with XAI is using enough power to source 100,000 homes. 100,000 homes. So just putting that into perspective. Also taking into consideration the existing legacy pollution that exists in a lot of communities where these data centers are located. In addition to that, still thinking about the economic implications at the intersection of public health is around school with our children. As mentioned, I was a teacher for 5 years, a district administrator, a little bit of a vice principal. That was not my ministry for 16 years. And I physically can attest to children, even before the arrival of data centers, missing a lot of days from school because of respiratory types of issues. Now, when you put that into perspective with school days lost, one, we know that we see a decline in academic achievement. Two, that means that we are also really putting strain on our classroom teachers and other supportive staff. That costs money, right? So there is a connection between school days lost at a district level, but then also taking into consideration implications for the parents. So, for example, if we're talking about a family where they receive hourly wages, when you have a sick child, a sick baby, that means that you have to take off from work, and that means that there's less money coming into the household. Another specific example here, where in California is interesting, of course, because you have Silicon Valley, which is now expanding across the country. But in California alone, there's a growth of 3 times for health-related costs assessed between 2019 and 2023, just because of the surge in data centers. So these two images. So when you look at this image here, this is a real life shout out to the citizen scientists that exist in the data center era. So this is actually a image of or a heat image from the Memphis XAI site with Colossus 1. So these are all of the plumes that are literally going into the air 24/7, 365 days a year. With data centers, they're nonstop, right? They are on all day, every day. And so when we think about the types of pollutants that are emitted from this particular data center that was powered by a methane gas turbine, that means that insufferable amounts of nitrogen dioxide as well as formaldehyde were pumped out into this already overburdened community, which leads me to not just talking about legacy pollution, but also cumulative impacts. So, where Colossus 1 is located in zip code 38109. And 38109 is a portion of South Memphis that includes three neighborhoods, Boxtown, Westwood, and then also a bit further up, the Riverside community. Also, in this same zip code, you have Valero, which is an oil refinery, which is next to MLK Park and across the street from a residential community. In fact, the Riverside community is where my parents are from and where my family still resides. Also, near Boxtown and Westwood, you have the Tennessee Valley Authority, which is a major power plant that is literally adjacent to XAI. In addition to that, you have over 17 other highly polluting industries that are concentrated in this particular zip code. It is the most polluted zip code in Shelby County and among the highest polluted in the state of Tennessee. It's also a cancer cluster. To make this a little bit more realistic, this is again even before data centers came into Memphis. My great grandmother living in this community had breast cancer. My all of my aunts, so all of my mom's aunts, my grandfather's sisters, every single one of them are deceased, and they all died from either cancer or cardiovascular disease. And that's not just a story that I tell. If you do a Google search today and you look at people that live in Southwest Memphis, this unfortunately is a story that far too often too many people have to share. Over here, you also can see the immensity of all of the turbines that at one point were all live at the same time. At one point, they said that it was only 15 turbines that were in operation, which were 15 too many. We later on found out that that was not true. They were actually operating over 20 turbines. But it gets worse. Now, we thought that we had a win. You may have seen a lot of things in the news about the resistance in Memphis around XAI and the methane gas turbines. So they decommissioned the turbines in Memphis because, the activists just raised so much Hades. They went right up the street to South Haven, Mississippi, where Memphis no longer had jurisdiction. And not only did they bring the turbines that they brought from Memphis, now in Mississippi, they have over 40 turbines. 40. They also are operating with no permits and no pollution control. So that means, from a data perspective, there's no accountability, there's no baseline of like before they were permitted, just how much damage was done, how much contribution to air pollution even existed. Some more actual facts and data. Now, this is some information that actually comes from a Harvard researcher, which I believe is also in this series of webinars that you'll hear from. So I won't steal his thunder, but did want to highlight this. So here we see a chart of the estimated health related damages. We see it's 30 to 44 million dollars. So you hear, with some of the folks that are in support of data centers talking about like, oh, this is such a great economic investment. Oh, there's going to be these jobs that are pretty much invisible. We're still waiting to see them. But what does it matter when you are accumulating this much debt as it relates to health issues? We also know that we are in a perpetual public health crisis as well as accessibility to quality health care. So that's just something that I think is really important, that when we think about public health, of course, we are concerned about the physical well-being, but also the economic viability from people who are extremely vulnerable as well. Here in this map, we see DeSoto County. All right, so this is DeSoto County. This is Shelby County. We're neighbors, right? So literally when I said that we are across state line, I meant it. So right here in the middle is XAI. They literally move right up the street. And so down here, you see the PM 2.5 um, particulate matter. You see the concentration and the range here. So this is where Colossus 2 which is in the South Haven site, and then Colossus 1 is in this region. We share the air, right? So, of course, as it relates to like the core of where both facilities are located, we're going to see the highest amounts of PM2 air pollution or particulate matter. But it doesn't stop there because we share the air. We can't contain the air. We can't put a box around the air. So we see that this pollution goes far out. Over here, you see Crittenden County, for example. That's Arkansas, right? And then you also see it expanding to other parts throughout Shelby County, so not even necessarily right next to the facilities. We also see DeSoto County. Now, with DeSoto County, it also has specific neighborhoods. For example, you have South Haven, but then you have Olive Branch. Now, Olive Branch is a bit more affluent, but it doesn't matter in this instance because air goes wherever it wants to go. In addition to this, also in Mississippi, there are other smaller towns like Horn Lake, Mississippi, Walls, Mississippi, all are being impacted by decisions that were made in a completely different city. So that is a complete injustice for a myriad of reasons, but puts into perspective how air pollution from these data centers travels. All right, so I spoke a bit about the issues surrounding air pollution. I mentioned the formaldehyde, the nitrogen oxide. I want to use a very specific example that still haunts me. So I had an opportunity to go to the hearing for the Mississippi site, and there was a parent that made comment, and the parent said that her and her children started to have like really bad like skin issues. Like they thought that, it was just eczema. They had never experienced that before, and it was really severe and became really sudden. So essentially, this parent went to a dermatologist. And so, interestingly enough, the dermatologist said, have you been exposed to formaldehyde? So, when we think about air pollution, we also have to think about other implications besides the normal things that we think about with respiratory issues, cardiovascular issues, even skin issues are posing a problem because it's so highly concentrated. How often would you come into contact with that much formaldehyde in the air? Also, something that is really important and is not listed here is around extreme heat. So, right now, even with some of these studies, some of the data was pulled like during cooler months, right? So, we know that in the cooler months, you won't necessarily use the same amount of energy. Memphis or Tennessee and Mississippi is hot. A lot of other places throughout the country, like Arizona, for example, where they're looking at data centers, it's extremely hot. So that means that as the months grow hotter, that means that these data centers are going to be using more energy because they're going to also be using more water because it's so hot. Now, in addition to that, there's also significant noise pollution. If you have an opportunity, if you Google noise pollution in South Haven, Mississippi, you'll be able to actually hear and see videos of extremely loud noise. I'm talking about, imagine there's like 30 jets outside of your window. It's that loud. It is that loud. Now, in South Haven, like they can actually look outside of their windows and see the facility. That's just how close it is to their homes. With noise pollution, it is an opportunity for there to be a bit more investment in research on how noise pollution, particularly at this level, impacts residential communities. There's quite a bit of research that exists around noise pollution from an occupational perspective, but this is a bit different, right? Because when you talk about noise pollution from an occupational perspective, you're not going to be at work all day. You're not going to be awake 24/7. Whereas with this particular type of noise from data centers, you hear it all day, every day. Not even just at your home, at daycares, at schools, any of the public places that are in proximity to these data centers. All right, some other concerns. We talked quite a bit about the gas turbines, also like with power plants. Of course, the dependency on fossil fuels are going to naturally exacerbate concerns around air pollution. Also, with the rising electricity rates, that's also a concern as well. But then also, I want to bring into the frame diesel backup generators. So, this is also an issue. So, with the data centers, even if they are connected to the grid, in some instances, dependent on like their peak demand and how much they're actually able to crank out when they are connected to the grid, they have to roll over into backup. Now, in Memphis, they use methane gas turbines. With some data centers, they use diesel. Diesel. We know how insidious diesel fuel is, but use diesel backup generators. Of course, this is going to exacerbate air pollution. Also, there's not a lot of oversight and accountability nor governance around when do these peak demands happen, how frequently are they using these backup generators. Utilities are not providing that level of specificity, which means that it is even more at risk for causing more air pollution and potentially making people more at risk for health issues. So, one key thing with messaging that I think is critical is around cumulative impacts, but then also body burden. Not in all places. Like I know that there is a ton of data centers that exist in Northern Virginia, for example. But when you look at places in the Southeast, particularly communities of color, you already see existing legacy pollution. And so adding on data centers with this intense air pollution, with these emissions, creates more risk of additional health issues. So I mentioned, for example, in Memphis, in 38109, again, where my family is from, I have family members that already died from cancer, being in this cancer cluster. So now when you introduce things such as formaldehyde, that makes the stakes even higher. In addition to that, as it relates to emissions, there are other types of health issues that oftentimes, when you go into a doctor's office, if you are a person of color, they may immediately associate that with lifestyle or other things that are not reflective of the fixed environment. But some of these air pollutants also can be attributed to diabetes, also obesity, hypertension, strokes. For example, I mentioned again, my family is from 38109. My father had a stroke and then unfortunately passed away at 65 from a heart attack. This is somebody that was not obese. This is someone that did not smoke, did not drink, but unfortunately lived the majority of his life in a polluted community. Right? Because I want to make sure that I am good on time because I want to answer questions. Two groups of people that are super important to me, children and pregnant women, as well as seniors, are so vulnerable. It goes without saying, and I don't want to be repetitive, but it's really important that when we think about data centers, it's critical that we use public health as a decision-making criteria. Thinking about the vulnerability of children that are in the proximity of a proposed data center, but then also pregnant women or childbirthing people is also very important. So, some clear things, and I'm going to skip ahead just a bit. Um, so that we can go into what do we do about this, particularly as people that work in public health. So, one, pause. We really need all of the data center expansion to pause. We do not know enough as it relates to public health risk, environmental health risk, and this even the fixed environment itself. So there is opportunity with a pause to do significant research. But then, in addition to the research, we also need to be proactive with determining how do we mitigate any additional harm. And that may come from permitting and enforceable standards, also training and development for regulators. This is new. So you have state and local regulators that one don't even know how to regulate because there's not clarity with EPA. And then also they might not have the tools, right, to be able to do the appropriate monitoring of a data center because it's so novel. Also, in addition to thinking about a pause, there's also a significant need for more peer reviewed research. So, I shared some information from the Harvard study, and you'll again hear this if you join the session with this Harvard researcher, that there really needs to be a greater investment in modeling. So, you heard me mention earlier that when this Harvard researcher looked at the data between Memphis and South Haven, remember, these turbines were not permitted. So, they operated almost a year with no government oversight, no regulatory oversight. So, there's not a true baseline of how much damage or how much was emitted from an air pollution perspective from the very beginning. So it's really important that those people where it's their ministry, where they work in modeling, where they work in very sophisticated data analysis, that there is more investment and contributions to figure out a way to create more sustainable data so that we can get to the place where we are preventing and mitigating harm. Also, in addition to this, I want to go over here as an example. We do know that things such as the EJ screening tool is gone. However, there are certain states that do have their own version of EJ screen. So, California, Michigan, for example, have those tools at the state that can be drilled down to the local level. But one of the federal tools that may not necessarily be used very often, but with the Southern Environmental Law Center, for example, in our appeal against the Colossus One, the attorneys used a lot of data from Cobra. So Cobra is actually an EPA tool that looks at some of the benefits, but also the impacts around health outcomes. So, for example, it gives you data around based on this type of emission or amount of this emission, what the implications will be for how many times you may go to an emergency room. Those are key indicators at the intersection of public health as well as the economics surrounding public health. In addition to this, it's also an opportunity to think about interoperability with connecting different types of data sets as it relates to health. I know, for example, there are more and more data sets that are coming out that seeks to the geographic location of data centers, but not very often do you see the connection where you can see where the actual data center is located and then what the existing public health issues are and then what the potential risk may be. And so it's really important to look to see what currently exists so we don't have to reinvent the wheel and then fill in those gaps. So I said a whole lot, but it seems really bleak right now. But I'm hoping that the public health experts that may be listening, the advocates, can really take into consideration how public health professionals really play a significant role. Those scientists, as it relates to really pushing our government, pushing industry to be more thoughtful as it relates to public health. And with that, I'll stop. And I think I'll turn it back over to Dr. Natasha. Yes, thank you.
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for all you have shared so far. I know we've got more in store to hear from you, but thank you so much. There's so much in what you shared to take away, and it's hard for me to sit with any one thing. Thinking about the amount of power that's used in XAI, how many homes that powers in comparison to our whole communities. Thinking about that particular community in, I believe you said South Memphis, that's home to 17 other highly polluting industries. And that we've heard similar with other communities where this has been proposed or is happening across the US, and that this is the most polluted zip code in Shelby County. The story of your family is absolutely heartbreaking. Those that have been affected by cancer and cardiovascular disease risk, both of which we know can be related to environmental exposures. So the not just in your backyard, but right here in your home and in your family experiences. So we are sorry to hear that. And we really appreciate you sharing that with us and helping to connect those dots. Um, about the decommissioned turbines that were moved not too far away. The amount of healthcare expenditures that are related to this compared to where we just saw the video beforehand about what communities expect to benefit in terms of revenue of data centers. Those numbers don't quite match up. Certainly be interested in questions, further questions around that. Love your comment that air pollution travels, and that it's more than respiratory and cardiovascular. We sit in the research of this space of cardiovascular disease and air pollution exposures. So we live and breathe it literally and figuratively. But your tale of formaldehyde and skin, there's a study from Dr. Susan Annenberg and her colleagues at George Washington University, and they share that fossil fuel related air pollution, yes, is related to cardiovascular disease, the cardiovascular system, and the respiratory system, but that it actually has adverse impacts on every major organ system. So fossil fuel related air pollution can have impacts on every major organ system. And then I love that you brought cumulative impacts into the conversation. Thank you so much. Okay, so we want people to ask your questions. There are already some in the chat. I'm going to share screen briefly to remind you of the multitude of ways that you are able to enter into this conversation. You can raise your hand to, I'm not sharing, apologies. You can raise your hand, and that way you can ask your question out loud, and we'll take your questions in the order that your hands are raised. And you're also able to just drop a question into the chat, and we'll do our best to get to as many as possible. We have a lot, so we'll go ahead and dive in. So thank you to those who have added questions. I'll continue to add questions, and if they're not related to this topic, we will do our best to save them and help get that to the speaker to which that is related. And LaTricea, do not hesitate to tell me this is outside my wheelhouse. That is perfectly okay. We all totally understand that. I'm thinking of where your presentation ended, where the discussion ended, and I'm going to go just a little bit out of order. And then I'll go back to the questions in order. But Lisa had a question that was right in response to something you shared But does the EPA even care now? And I'll ask you that question in the framing, not just of EPA, but who should care? Um, and who does care and who is using data or needs data to be informed for decision making. So I'll pass that to you.
Yeah, so the EPA actually does care. I'm gonna give you I'm gonna tell you why. It's not because this is just LaTricia's opinion. Let me frame it that way. I don't think that it is because they care about like the implications like on humans is money. So, one, I'll give you like a current example. So, because legal recourse is being used, that costs money. It costs money, not even just like, with the industry, but now, for example, I think about the lawsuit that was filed with the NAACP, the Southern Environmental Law Center, and Earth Justice. You have Elon is spending I don't know how much money, right on his attorneys, and because it's a violation of the Clean Air Act, it now is going federal because the local regulator, did not issue the permit when they were supposed to. So that's very expensive. When you think about the lawsuit that's been filed, in South Haven on noise pollution, that's a federal suit. So you have the implications from an economic perspective. I also want to note, and this was so interesting. Um, in January of this year, even we have been screaming from the top of our lungs that specifically with the methane gas turbines, that they required a permit for EPA to double down on that, to say, yeah, they are a major source, they do require a permit. We were honestly like really shocked that they did that, but because they made that statement, it opens up Pandora's box as it relates to litigation. So that's one thing. The other thing is from a highly political perspective. This is a very unique issue where, regardless of race, regardless of economic status, this is bringing us together as a country. So, regardless of political party, people are really upset about these data centers. And so it has become a top line item for elections, particularly as we're in the midterms, where literally, from across the board, whether it is in a rural community, in the suburbs, in an urban environment, like people are literally like, what is your stance on these data centers? And depending on your answer, we're going to get you out of office. So, for example, in Missouri, there's a place in Missouri where they literally stood on business and they were like, this decision that you made about these data centers, we're going to make sure that you don't get in office. So, I definitely think, it is an issue for EPA. It also, is an issue like for the White House as well. President Trump said data centers have a bad PR problem. PR, but I'm like, we know that it's more issues than that. So I do think that they care, but not for the reasons that we would like for them to.
That is helpful context and helpful to keep in mind. Thank you. So we've got a lot of questions for you in a little bit of time. Do you have thoughts on noise ordinances and how this may
Yeah.
be helpful to health in communities?
Yeah, I definitely think honestly it's kind of low-hanging fruit. The majority of localities like have existing laws on the book, right? Around noise pollution. So I definitely think like having an ordinance is really good. Now, here's the issue. It goes back to our local and state regulators not really being equipped. So when you do a noise ordinance, like what does it look like for oversight and accountability? That's the part where it's really murky, where sure, I think that you can get an ordinance passed, but like holding the industry accountable to that, what does that look like? Especially because this is so new. right? Like this particular industry. So I think it is possible, but it definitely is a need for those people that are in position, for governance. Do they know how to do that? Not sure.
Important question and consideration. You received lots of comment as you shared about the Memphis data center and the power grid. Can you expand further around does the Memphis data center receive power from the main power grid and thoughts that you might have on bring your own power?
Mm. Yeah, so that bring your own power. Actually, the state of Tennessee actually passed a bill, our state legislature, that gives, free reign for people to bring their own power. That's so dangerous. That's a regulatory nightmare. Oh my God. So now just think about all of these like private mini power plants. Now in Memphis, we have a public owned utility. But to better answer that question, so XAI is connected to the grid. The reason why they mobilized those methane gas turbines is because they wanted to go quick. They adopt the Silicon Valley, mentality like scale fast, go quick. And so they wanted to move faster than what the utility could sustain, right? And so that's why they waited that gap year until, the utility was able to actually get them connected to the grid. Also, our local utilities, because you know that like nationally it's a grid issue across the board. So there was a lot of work that went into sustainability, like is our grid gonna crash, because there have been issues within the last like 5 years where we had a rolling blackout. In fact, and I don't want to make this morbid, the day of my dad's wake, because my dad died a week before Christmas, the power went out because we had an ice storm. The power was out at the church. We had to reschedule the funeral because there was no power and the water went out. So a lot of work had to go into like, let's, see, like, make sure that like the residential power is up to par. But the issue is that I mentioned they still have backup turbines. They still have those, but it's not clear on when they activate them, when they use them. There's no transparency. Like at what peak do they, have to use it? Like it's not clear on when they're using it. So, it's very gray. And again, that oversight and accountability is non-existent.
Well, appreciate your thoughts there and appreciate your vulnerability and sharing about a traumatic event, but helping us to understand what that instability and power, how that can affect us at the most unexpected of times. Okay, we are just about out of time. I'm going to try to squeeze in one or two more questions. Might just be one because this is a big question. Given that the connection between data centers and AI, we have a question from Alyssa. How can we use AI responsibly? It's almost impossible to avoid it, she says.
Yeah, so and this might just be like the whimsical optimist. I do think that there is a way to get to a better place. I always use the internet as an example. I'm a millennial, so I grew up in the 90s, and I remember I remember like how freaked out people were about the internet. I remember, people at church saying the internet is the devil, So remember that vividly, but I also remember like it was chaotic in, the beginning of the internet era, but here we are now, so I kind of use that like as a framing, but the key thing is they gotta stop. Like, stop the proliferation, stop the build out. Like, we don't know enough. I think like if we could like disconnect like the intense capitalism that is driving, AI and data centers, I think that we would be in a better place because it's really like a war on who has the biggest and baddest, like platform, the competition with China and all of that. I'm like, who cares who wins if we don't have our earth or a planet to live in, so I think that if there is a pause, there's investment in an assessment of risk, I think that we can get to a better place. And then the front end usage of AI is a completely different conversation for another time around ethical usage of AI. I know it's a lot of people that are like, every time you make like a meme or whatever using AI, like, oh, like you're using this many bottles of water. We have to be careful with that also because we don't want to get into the whole greenwashing of if we recycle, that will cure, no, we need to go to the top of the mass producers.
I think we are going to end on that note. I love the whimsical optimist. I'm going to take that on, and I'm going to try to be a whimsical optimist at least for the rest of this week. Um, no guarantees beyond that, but we so appreciate you. So please join me in thanking LaTricea Adams for taking her time to share her expertise with us. I'm seeing the icons come across the screen. Please keep them coming. I just have a few things to share to close us out. I know we are at time. We would love to hear from you about any feedback that you have from this webinar. We want to continue to try to make this series what people need it to be. So please, you can scan the QR code that is there on your screen, or you're able to visit the link. I also dropped the link in the chat for those of you that are able to access it that way. We would love your feedback. We read every point of feedback, so thank you. It is our hope that this webinar met your expectations. We thank you so much, LaTricea, for sharing your expertise with us today. We thank all of you in the audience for your participation. Thank you to the Christina Lee Brown Environment Institute for hosting this, along with Greenheart Louisville and the U of L Superfund Research Center. And thank you to PSR for sponsoring. So stay tuned for upcoming topics in the series. Up next on June 17th at noon Eastern, join us as we learn about data centers and the community from Aubrey Connor Esquire of NAACP National. All of our webinars will take place Wednesdays at noon Eastern. You can join all, but please be sure to share this with your networks and colleagues. I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment to share with you about the upcoming Food and Science Forum. If you are here in the Louisville area, this will be June 11th at Bates Memorial Baptist Church. There is a farmers market that starts at 6 p.m. And I'm sorry, the farmers market starts at 4 p.m. The expert panel begins at 6 p.m. And if you don't live in the area, yes, you can watch the expert panel live streamed by following Bates Memorial Baptist Church on their Facebook or YouTube channel. And then we'd love for you to stay in touch with us. Stay connected by visiting online at centers.louisville.edu/Envirome to stay connected with the Envirome Institute. You can also stay up to date of upcoming events by visiting our events webpage, and we would love for you to follow us on our socials. We're on almost all the social platforms at U of L Envirome. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you to our speaker, and thank you to everyone for being here and joining us.
Thank you, Natasha.